Welcome to Art.Nature.Science on the Binabara Cultural Landscape, the podcast that tells the story of the mountain's natural wonder through art making and exploring the creative spirit, and celebrates the history and heritage of this magnificent World Heritage Area. My name's Michelle Walker, and I'm joined today by three guests: Tim Atherton, Jankees van der Haaf, and Lena van Swinderen. Tim is a long-time Binabara guest and shareholder, and was the co-founder of Friends of Binabara in 1984 and is now the chair of the recently formed Binabara Foundation. Jankees has been active in Friends of Binabara since 2004, almost all of those years in some capacity on the committee. Channeling his enthusiasm of a significant group of volunteers to maintain 30 hectares of Binabara nature surrounded by the national park are his main focus. Lena is a PhD student in conservation science at the University of Queensland, and she and her family joined Friends of Binabara when she was about 10 years old. What a wonderful pedigree you each have. So thank you for letting me introduce you. Welcome, welcome.
Thanks, Michelle. Nice to be here.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having us.
This first question is about Friends of Binabara as a group of volunteers. I know you share the love of nature and have been doing that for nearly 40 years. Tell us some more about what you do within the group.
Well, if you look at Friends of Binabara, and let's call them FoBBs because everybody talks about FoBBs. FoBBs basically had two main things. One was supporting Binabara Lodge as a little company, and the second part is really making sure that 30 hectares of beautiful nature that surrounds us gets the proper attention. And of course, after the fire, the focus has been changed a little bit. The fire determined that we needed to spend a lot more time looking after the landscape. So in the last few years, that has been the main focus of FoBBs.
Lena, what's been your experience? Yeah, well, I joined FoBBs very young as a junior FoBB, actually through Jankees. His son Peter was in my year 4 class, and we became friends. Me and my family, we've sort of stuck with it through the years, and it's been a really nice experience. You get to learn a lot about various different plants and just how maintaining an organization like Binabara works, which I personally find very interesting.
Has it been an influence for you in terms of your career path and finding yourself doing a PhD in conservation science?
Yeah, it definitely has. It just means from a young age, I've sort of been exposed to nature, exposed to people who care about nature, and people who are very good at maintaining the ecosystems, which is, it's a wonderful thing. I recommend people bring their children to Binabara. I think it's good at producing conservation scientists.
I have to say, yes, it is. Tim, you were a part of FoBBs at the very early stage. What's your reflection on the last 40 years of the organisation?
We came up with the idea of Friends of Binabara to assist the lodge with whatever projects they felt were necessary. And we approached the general manager at the time, who was a little bit wary. He was a bit worried about interfering guests and shareholders. But ultimately, we developed a good symbiotic relationship with the lodge. In those early days, we were doing a lot of clearing of tracks on the Binabara property. But of course, now the FoBBs has morphed into assisting more with land regeneration, which is a great project. And it's still a very social thing. I mean, fun of the weekend is getting together socially on the Saturday night and Sunday morning. But on the Saturday, there are some very significant projects being done to assist the lodge, as well as the land regen. There's people working in library, categorising the books, minor works around the lodge and things like that. So the fear of interference is gone, and the cooperation between the lodge and FoBBs is first class. It really is.
I understand that bush regeneration is a key focus for some of the work that FoBBs volunteers do. What has been some of the things that have come out? And I know after the fire, there's been a change in focus perhaps, and a change in the areas that you've been working. Talk to me about the bush regen work that you've been doing.
Yeah, because it's really a very key activity at the moment, for both for the area and for us. Well, of course, what the fire did is it nibbled at the edges of all the whole property, and here and there it destroyed quite a lot. But there's other areas where the fire, yes, it was there, but the destruction is limited. So the big thing that we could do after the fire is we got some small grants. We engaged Kirby Ralston, and Kirby has 20 years plus of experience of bush regeneration on the mountain. And with his experience, and he had also been working as a ranger in the national park, so with his connection with the national park and his local experience, he could really help us lifting it to a better level. So the first thing that he did was help us on analyze, what do you actually find after a fire? Some areas still have structure, which means that there is a huge resilience. It just takes time, and you shouldn't interfere and destroy that resilience by, walking through and flattening everything and compacting everything. And in those areas where there is structure, is there still anything that needs a helping hand, or do you leave that part to itself? And then other areas, for instance, where the canopy was totally destroyed, and the sun gets straight on the soil, all of a sudden everything warms up. It's being hugely heated by the fire. What happens then is a completely different story, and those sort of areas need a bit more of a helping hand for longer. So with his support, we could actually understand the type of things that we had to do. I also got some grants to get lots and lots of local native plants. And again, because of his understanding, we can make sure we put the right plants in, not something that does well somewhere in the scenic rim at 200-meter altitude, but something that really grows in this location. Because one of the big lessons for bush regeneration is there is not a one rule fits all solution to regeneration. There is soil, there is the altitude, there is the exposure to sun, the whole, everything together makes a unique location, and you really have to learn how to work with your location. And I think we've been reasonably successful in that, and we see that some of the plantings that we did by now about 2.5 years ago really start to look very healthy. And you also learn, of course, that one spot where you plant and you think, that needs to be followed up by watering, and then it turns out that it's already waterlogged. And one other thing I should mention is that Benabara as an organization has also made a change, because, of course, the nature part of the whole area is hugely important to their business. And Luann, as general manager, has now appointed Angus as the landscape supervisor in the staff group. So we really have somebody to work with, to talk with, who is developing an understanding of the whole area. So the cooperation with staff through him and his responsibility in terms of looking after the landscape is a great thing for FoBBs, because it means that our work gets proper follow-up, and we look at longer term things, not only as an isolated group, but also together with the staff. So that is, together, I think, is a good recipe for generating something that is sustainable for the future. We'll still make mistakes. There are still areas with here and there some weeds and stuff like that. Lantana hasn't completely disappeared from the premises, but we're doing the right thing, and you can see great results.
And that's an interesting point that you make about there's no single recipe, you have to learn as you go. What has been the approach to monitoring and evaluating works have been done and how it's progressing?
Well, of course, in terms of planting, it's a matter of follow-up and making sure that it does get watered if necessary. And at that stage, you then need to leave it to nature to do, and to make sure that the things that will develop will actually have a chance to do so. And one of the big things that you can see in that regeneration is that the first things that happen is that whole pioneer vegetation is developing. So there's lots of plants that may look very weedy on the surface, but if you actually see what happens is they have big leaves, they create a bit of shade, they make sure that there's some moisture in the soil. And underneath those pioneer plants, things like red cedars and other rainforest species then actually germinate and start to develop. So at the moment, it still looks somewhat weedy, be it in large part due to pioneer plants. And slowly but surely, that will be overtaken by the next phase of forest development. So those are things that we all need to learn, and I think also needs to be explained to visitors, because a lot of people feel that, it's all weeds. Well, luckily, it's not all weeds. Yes, we can point you to some spots where it's the case, but it's certainly not the case everywhere.
And those pioneer plants are characteristic for also growing so quickly, aren't they, to get that shade up and happening. So I guess in that way they can look a bit weedy. Lena, what about you and your experience of being involved in these bush regeneration weekends? What have you learnt and what have you witnessed as part of FoBBs?
Well, I really enjoy these weekends because plants especially they're not my specialty. I don't really actually know that much about plants. So it's really interesting hearing what people like Kirby have to say on these weekends. And it's given me a lot of respect for people who do bush regeneration on the regular. I think recently we were dealing with Madeira vine. I had no idea getting rid of this vine, it's like bomb disposal. You have to be really careful you don't lose leaves and nodules. And I actually didn't know that there were weeds that were that easily spread. And it's been a sort of an interesting fact to carry around and tell people when I'm back from Binna Burra. Yeah, it's just been really interesting.
It's quite incredible, isn't it, when you get up close and personal with some of the invasive weed species in a bush area and in a regeneration project, just how incredibly tenacious they can be. And you come to understand, I think, through bush regen, how amazing those plants are at propagating themselves across the landscape. Back in the day when I was a conservation person, I did a lot of work in Madeira vine, and that was quite challenging, just how easy it is to allow it to keep going at a great rate of knots. It's a good learning for us all.
I wanted to add one thing, because of course we talk a lot about incursion of exotic weeds and stuff like that, and the fire has obviously given some opportunity for that, and it has happened here and there. But what has also happened is that we have actually found some things that are pretty rare and endangered. I think the little crown on that work there is a tiny plant that we first saw in one of the areas near the old driveway. And we thought, it looks a bit weedy, but nobody recognized it. Even Kirby didn't recognize it. And we thought, it's maybe a weed, maybe it's not. And I took a specimen to Queensland Herbarium here in Brisbane. And so I dropped it off and I received an email and said, oh, this is actually a native plant and it's very unusual to find that. And we haven't got it in our collection. Can you do an official collection? So they sent me the forms. When I went back the next week, I picked up the right pieces of the plant, took the pictures, did the exact thing about the location. And now that little plant is in the Queensland Herbarium collection with Benabara as its founding place. We never realized that before the fire. Maybe it was there, but we certainly didn't know. And those sort of little gems are a beautiful thing, when you do this whole work. And sometimes it's that difficult to see the big picture, and you have these little gems that is really highly motivating for this type of work.
A great story and an unexpected gift, isn't it, from the fire, that you could have that finding and then it become part of the scientific knowledge base for Queensland.
Yeah.
Tim, was there something you wanted to jump in and add?
No, I was just wondering whether it was named after the FoBBs or did it already have a botanical name allocated at the Jankees?
No, it had a botanical name. It just was not in the collection. So it still has the original name and has not been changed. And Athertonia is not yet on the horizon.
It's not FoBBs. What a shame.
FoBBs. That's what I was thinking, the FoBBs or something like that. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I would love to hear a bit more about the Binabara Foundation. Tim, would you like to talk us through? It's recently been formed. Tell us about what its role is.
Well, Binabara's always had a very long history of weeks where people can go up and go to art workshops, photography schools. I mean, I attended several myself. And the relationship between those programs and nature was a very close connection. So generally speaking, the art schools would go out and paint the natural landscape or take photographs of the natural bush. So the foundation was set up to run educational, scientific and cultural programs at the lodge, obviously in association with the lodge's general guest activities, but attract funding for specialist programs under those categories. One of the things I'm very enthusiastic about is developing a relationship between the lodge and the First Nations history of the park. And we do have an Aboriginal elder on our board, Uncle Ted. He's very well respected in Southeast Queensland, Northern New South Wales. And we are hoping to do a lot of research into the Indigenous history of the area, particularly Woongunara. It's not Lamington anymore. Well, it is Lamington, but it's also known by its Indigenous name. And do a lot of work in relation to history, the storytelling, which is very critical to the history of Indigenous occupation in that area. That's what we're aiming to do. Very soon we're going to open the foundation for membership, and we're hoping to get people sign up for a very nominal fee as members of the foundation who are like-minded, would like to see those sorts of programs run. Last year, we ran a artist in residence program at the Lodge, which was very successful with Renata Buziak, and we are looking at continuing that program in association with the activities at the Lodge. So we just appointed a new director, Carleen Grimmer, who's very well respected in the arts area, and she's going to take over management of our artist in residence program. There are a number of proposals in our books even now for what we might do this year. So Carleen's going to sort through those and come back to the board with a recommendation.
That sounds exciting, because I know that a number of the listeners will be interested in the arts program, either as participants or artists themselves that might want to be involved.
Yes, because remarkably, when Renata started her artist in residence program, she very quickly accumulated a dedicated bunch of volunteers, about 30 or so, who are very enthusiastic about the artist in residence program being run at Binabara. And those volunteers are keen to carry on their volunteering and assisting the program into the future.
And you're also setting up a new history and heritage working group as part of the foundation. Talk to us a bit about that, Tim.
Yes, well, this is a fantastic initiative. Unfortunately, a lot of Binabara's historical records were lost in the fire. And between Steve Noakes, our Binabara's chairman, and myself, came up with the idea of setting up a working party for history and heritage. History, obviously, of the Lodge, but not just the Lodge. It's also about the park area. And the heritage is not just the heritage of the park, it's also the Indigenous occupation. So we've now already got about 14 or 15 people who've put their hands up to work with the working group to assist with researching, cataloguing our history. And in fact, we had a donation on the weekend of Bernard O'Reilly's book about Green Mountains, which is going to go into our reserve section of our library. A signed version, I'd like to say, signed by Bernard himself. Very special. Slowly but surely, that reference library that we did have that was lost, tragically, will get rebuilt by this group. I
know you probably share great memories of that Binabara library of sitting up there in that top level and with a book and supposed to be reading, but actually watching birds and the landscape out of the library window. I think that sounds very interesting. And before we finish off, we'll let people know how to get involved and how to put up their hand for things. But just before we do, I want to throw a few rapid fire questions at you. This is a bit of fun. And I would love each of you to have an answer. And the answer can be really very quick. First thing that comes to mind, if you had to sum up Binabara in one photo, what would it be? Tim, you're the photographer.
I'm a great fan of Talawalal. Particularly when you go up there when it's wet and the cloud is descended and you get up and amongst those beautiful Antarctic beaches with all the lichens and the mosses.
Fabulous. Jankees?
Well, for me, arriving at Benabara and looking at that beautiful old cottage sitting there in their fantastic green, that's the start of Benabara.
Beautiful. Lena, how about you? What's your photograph in your mind's eye?
I think the view where the lodge used to be, especially there's the stump there overlooking the view where I think almost every time we've been there, my family and I've tried to pile as many people on there as possible. Which I wouldn't necessarily recommend for safety reasons, but it is what I picture when I think of Binabara, and I think we have many actual photos of that occurring.
Yeah, it sounds wonderful. And my last rapid fire question is, what does art, nature, science mean to you? I'm going to go around the other way. Lena, art, nature, science, that combination, what comes to mind?
Basically my job.
Okay.
it's my interests. I would say they're all pretty interconnected. I think if you have an appreciation for one, we can sort of build on to the next.
Beautiful.
Art, nature, and science is a hugely important element of what makes Binabara, and we need to make sure that in the new lodge and in the future it has a central element, because that will attract people to the uniqueness of what it has to offer.
Beautiful. Tim?
I'm going to mix them up a little bit. Well, nature is what Binabara is all about. Binabara was established to bring people closer to nature. Science is understanding the nature of our environment and the relationship between humankind and its environment. And art is an expression of that connection. So those three things come very nicely together in the program.
Mm. Thank you. I just wanted to ask, is there anything else you'd like to add from any of your experiences or the areas where you're working? Add in an extra point before we wrap up today.
I would like to do that because we've talked about all the serious sides of FoBBs and doing all this great work. And Tim has already mentioned it briefly. But of course, a very important part of having a group of volunteers like this together and keeping it together is that we're also just having a good time. We enjoy being up there. We jointly put together a dinner every Saturday night, and it's always a big surprise and a fantastic experience to see how many beautiful things everybody brings up. And it has to be a big group of people who are having a good time to have this at the moment and to make sure that it survives in the future. Thanks to Joe Weir originally, when we started Junior FoBBs, I'm very proud to say that FoBBs is one of those great volunteer organizations that actually have 4 generations coming at the same time.
Wow.
And I'm very conscious of the fact that a lot of volunteer organizations are slowly getting on an average age footing that is not sustainable for the future. We are determined to make sure that FoBBs is not one of them. And I think we're doing it right.
I think so. That sounds like it. Lena, I'd love to hear some thoughts from you.
I really wanted to emphasize to anyone listening that the youth are present in FoBBs. There's a bunch of us. There's my siblings and also the various friends we drag along. So come along. It's a lot of fun.
Beautiful. That's a great segue. Thank you. How can people get in touch with FoBBs? So anyone listening might be able to jump on.
You can easily find us on the Benabara website. There is a tab and you can get onto there. I have an inquiry, and the next morning I find that in the FoBBs email, the marketing department at FoBBs at Binabara does a great job making sure we don't lose any people there. We're happy to start the conversation and see if you want to join us.
And the foundation, Tim, what's the best contact details?
Well, likewise, through the Binabara website. We shouldn't rush us with applications for membership just now because we're not quite ready for it. But when the time comes, we'll certainly put out the word to Binabara shareholders, Binabara guests. We get to have a very good guest database, and organisations like Bushwalking Queensland, the American Natural History Association, other groups like that. So we'll get the word out there. The objects and intentions of the foundation I think will align with a lot of people who are regular guests up there and regular visitors to park. Can I just say just about Binabara and FoBBs? I went away, I was attracted to a job in Western Australia, and I was away from Queensland, my home state, between 1998 and 2007. But I was really worried about FoBBs because I thought when I left, FoBBs was a fairly old established group of members, but everyone was getting on in age, and I thought it might die on the vine. But thanks to people like Jankees, and I give Jankees and Joe Weir credit for their initiative, they attracted younger people to come along. Junior FoBBs is a great initiative, and it's as alive and as healthy as it's ever been. And there's a real vibe in the room on the Saturday night. Everyone's worked hard during the day, but on Saturday night, it is just a celebration of our hard work and what we're doing. It's a fabulous bunch of people to be with. And the interesting thing was, there were 2 or 3 members there on the weekend just gone who were there in the early days when we set FoB up. They're still with us. So I think it's a testament to the longevity of the Friends of Binabara.
Sounds wonderful. And folks, if you're listening, as both Tim and Jankees said, you can find information on the Binabara website, and also attached to this podcast, I'll have all the links. I so appreciate the 3 of you coming on and chatting to me. And Lena, I wish you super well in your PhD studies. How far along are you?
Oh, thanks very much, Michelle. I started in October, so I have pretty much 3 years ahead of me, unless I get it done early, which would be a great blessing to everyone involved. But I really enjoy it. It's fantastic.
Yeah. we're going to look forward to hearing more from you, no doubt. So Tim, Jankees, Lena, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate you coming on and having a chat about Friends of Binabara and the Binabara Foundation.
Thanks, Michelle. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks very much, Michelle.
The producers and artists on this podcast acknowledge the traditional owners of the Binabara area and Lamington National Park, the Yugambeh Language Group. We also thank Catherine Slingsby for the podcast theme music, an excerpt from her piece, Sweet Dream.